President Biden is headed to Israel and Saudi Arabia tomorrow. The trip could lead to more peace agreements in the Middle East and build on the Abraham Accords established by the Trump administration. Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem.
One aim of the trip, according to President Biden, is to deepen Israel's integration in the region. He also said that Israeli leaders came out strongly for my going to Saudi. Biden's relationship with Saudi Arabia, however, has been strained. After taking office, he released a CIA report blaming the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi on the Crown Prince, and during the presidential campaign called the Desert Kingdom a pariah. Plus, he's expected to ask Saudis to produce more oil, hoping to reduce the high price of gas in the U.S. Yet many in the region also hope this visit can be one more step toward normalizing relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. One of the chief architects of the Abraham Accords, Jason Greenblatt, hopes the White House realizes the vital role Saudi Arabia plays in the region. He wrote about how the Biden administration can build on the historic achievement in his new book called In the Path of Abraham: How Donald Trump Made Peace in the Middle East and How to Stop Joe Biden from Unmaking It.
Well, Jason Greenblatt joins us now for more. You were one of the main architects of the Abraham Accords during the Trump administration. How would you assess the Biden administration and what it's done to build on those accords?
Well, until this trip, I'd assess it pretty poorly. I think he's alienated a key ally, Saudi Arabia. He's done okay with Israel. He's been pretty cautious. I think this trip is going to be a very, very important trip. I hope he stands by our ally Israel, but I also hope he treats Saudi Arabia with the importance of it being an ally that we need. President Biden wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post, couldn't talk about oil, which he should have, couldn't really talk about Iran other than to say that he's working with the Europeans, which is a mistake. He should be working with Israel and Saudi Arabia and others in the Middle East. So I think this trip will be very telling. I wish him success, but I am certainly worried.
There's talk that the need for oil worldwide as a result of the war in Ukraine, that the need for oil is actually going to overshadow any talk of recognition of Israel, building on the Abraham Accords. What do you hope to see out of his trip to Saudi Arabia?
Well, first, he needs to repair the relationship with Saudi Arabia. I think he needs to give the respect to the crown prince that he took away. I think he needs to give the respect to the kingdom of Saudi Arabia that he took away by calling it a pariah. I don't expect any major moves by Saudi Arabia on this trip. Perhaps they'll come away with some sort of steps, which I think would be a positive thing, and good for him if he could build on what President Trump did. But I do think the most important thing he could deal with in the region entirely is the Iran threat to the region. That is what his focus should be on this trip.
Well, so far the administration doesn't seem to have taken the Iran threat very seriously. They've actually reopened. Recently they've said, well, we're not going to be able to get to an agreement. But do they understand the historical importance of trying to get an alliance with the Sunni Arab nations in the Gulf and try to form a coalition that would stop Iran?
No, I don't think they do. They pay a little bit of lip service to that, but we're still very tied to the Europeans. Think about our weakness. Look at the weakness we show Iran. We're negotiating, or until very recently, we were negotiating through a European proxy. We can't even be in the room to make our own demands. We appear very, very weak. The Europeans are just not relevant to this equation. They're not on the threat. They're not on the line of fire that the Middle East is. We should be only tying ourselves to the Middle Eastern countries who are in the direct line of fire. The Europeans have their own problem in their own backyard, and look what's happening now. Iran is helping Russia attack Ukraine, so they're destabilizing. Iran is destabilizing Europe, and the Europeans want to make a deal with Iran, who's threatening the Middle East. The Europeans are just not the right people that we should be partnering with on this.
How close do you think Iran is to actually developing a nuclear weapon? And if they do get one in the near term, what does that do to the region?
Very hard to tell how close they are. I mean, Israel has released some intelligence. They had this unbelievable trove of intelligence that they managed to get a couple of years ago when President Trump was the president. It showed that Iran was cheating on the JCPOA, even though technically the JCPOA wasn't active at the time. but they can get pretty close, and that's why the region is so worried, and that's why Europe is really just not relevant. Iran is a menace to the region, not just with respect to nuclear weapons, by the way. We gave them a ton of money when we signed the JCPOA under Barack Obama, and they used their terrorist proxies to attack Israel, to attack the UAE, to attack Saudi Arabia and others. They make mischief in Morocco, all sorts of places. So I don't think this administration really recognizes the threat that it is. I think we sort of bury our heads in the sand and think that if we could solve the problem for a couple of years, that's a good thing. But what do we tell our kids years later? That we solved the problem for a couple of years, but we pretended to ignore it for their benefit? Very, very bad strategy.
Well, I think Europe is getting involved now because Iran is sending drones to help Russia in the war in Ukraine. And you just look at their export of terrorism, their export of weapons, and they are a threat to the entire world. Let's turn to Israel for a moment. You helped draft the deal of the century to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And now the Biden administration, it seems like they want to go back to a two-state solution. I've been asking repeatedly, is a two-state solution even viable on the ground anymore? Do you think it can work?
No, and I'll tell you why. Because the phrase really means nothing, right? Or I should say it means different things to different people. Until you get down into the details, what does that mean for Israel's security? Are you really going to give the Palestinians a complete sovereign state where they can use that as a launching ground to attack Israel the way Gaza, once Israel left Gaza, the way Hamas, the terrorists, the Iran-funded terrorists, have attacked Israel? The devil's always in the detail here, and that's why we drafted such a long, comprehensive plan. Yes, we all want peace, and yes, we all want the Palestinians to have better lives, but you got to sit down and do the work and understand what it means. So at the moment, I don't think any solution is viable. I don't think the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah is interested, and certainly the terrorist thugs in Gaza are not interested. But even if somehow you miraculously got them to the table, you got to get through the very hard details of defining what that Palestinian state really means and how to make sure our important friend and ally Israel never has to worry that it's going to be attacked by the Palestinians.
Oh, well said. Well, the book is called In the Path of Abraham, and you can find it wherever books are sold. Jason Greenblatt, thanks for joining us, and thanks for your insight.
Thanks for having me.